So Giles, you have a pretty incredible story. Can you talk about how your personal experiences put you on a path toward becoming an advocate for people injured in conflict zones?
I spent 25 years documenting the impact of war globally, what I call the legacy of war. I don't photograph tanks, soldiers, explosions. My work is always about people like Atola, who we see behind us, documenting the impact of war. And then myself in 2011, I was working in Afghanistan. I had what I always say was the worst day at the office. Got blown up, lost both my legs, my left arm, spent 1 year in hospital, 37 operations, was told I would never walk again, never work again, never live independently. But 18 months later, I was back in Afghanistan carrying on my job. So for me, that was always a blessing. You know, obviously, it was a battle to regain my independence, but I realized that if I went back to do the work that I did, I would be better at it. I would have that relationship with the people that I documented that nobody else would. And in fact, it's funny that you should have this image up on the wall, because this is Atola, and this was the first photograph I took after my injuries. And Atola was 7 years old, and he was walking to school, and he stepped on a landmine. And he was injured just 2 weeks after I was injured, just a few miles from where I was injured in Kandahar. And I remember making this photograph, and people always say, do you get upset, do you get emotional when you make photographs? I'm like, no, it's like a surgeon. You know, I have to be precise and do my job. But as I was looking through this viewfinder, and it was the first time I'd made photographs myself for 18 months, I was tearing up because I was watching Atola walking backwards and forwards on his little plastic leg with his plastic arm. And I remember thinking, well, why should a boy walking to school end up with the same pain I'm in each day, emotional and physical, have to go through what I go through because he wanted an education. And so that, for me, was the moment I realized that, I could tell the stories like nobody else could, because quite literally, I had walked in the footsteps of people like Atola.
Can you talk about your recent trip to Ukraine? I know you were delivering an array of vital supplies. What did you see there? What were the most pressing needs of persons with disabilities in Ukraine?
So I've been documenting the conflict in Ukraine since 2015. And when the full-scale invasion happened, my organization, Legacy of War Foundation, we just stepped in to start with really basic things like specialist wheelchairs, getting the equipment that people needed, assistive technology. But as the conflict escalated, we started doing evacuations with ambulances. And, Ukraine is a country in transition. It's coming out of years of Soviet control. Civil society is really strong, but it's important that civil society is creating those changes for the rights of persons with disability in that country. And the conflict has exacerbated a lot of those needs. So, for example, transportation is very difficult, railway lines. So what we were finding is a lot of people with disability were being left behind when it came to evacuations. So to this day, that's mainly what we're focused on, is helping with evacuations. But as I say, civil society is incredibly strong, and I think it's one of the most important things that I advocate for globally, is that when an emergency crisis happens, often the big aid agencies, the UN, deals directly with the government, and civil society gets pushed out of it again. Civil society is so important for all marginalized communities. It's their voice. It's the people on the ground that understand the stories and the needs. And so for me, what I'm always trying to do is to work with the civil society organizations, amplify their voices, because they are the ones in the best position to tell us what those needs are.
You just spoke about the people who get left behind in conflict zones. I was reporting at the Poland-Ukraine border shortly after Russia invaded, and actually spoke with a number of people who talked about the challenges of, getting relatives with disabilities out of the country. It's clear that disabled refugees are among the most vulnerable groups in war zones. What can be done to spread more awareness about the challenges these people face?
I was at the end of last year in Adre in Chad, on the border with Sudan, meeting a lot of refugees fleeing the terrible war that's happening there. And there was a really good example of people arriving with disabilities, often had to leave their assistive technologies behind, whether it be prosthetic legs or wheelchairs. But because of the state of the crisis and the lack of funding, the UNHCR was unable to even register those with disabilities. So then when you walk around the tents, I met a woman there who was a very active participant in civil society back in Sudan. She had an electric wheelchair and a motorized wheelchair. She would get around a lot. She had all that was abandoned, and she was now crawling to the toilet at night. And she'd been there for several months. And the simple thing is, first off, it's registration. It's realizing that it's important when people arrive in a refugee camp that we note those with disabilities, because they are more vulnerable. It can be everything from collecting water to food stations. And at the same time, what I would advocate for as well is those from marginalized communities are often the most resilient. They have so much to offer into the communities, into the societies, into the crisis. It's simply a case of disability is often caused by your environment. You know, when I'm at home, I have no disabilities as far as I'm concerned because everything is suited for me. As soon as I'm in the front line in Ukraine, it's a greater challenge. And so I understand what it's like for people who are displaced is suddenly they're in an environment where it might be that all the signs are written and they're blind. It might be that everything is said audibly and they can't hear. It might be that they don't have their prosthetic legs, or the wheelchairs mean they're not accessible to the toilets. So it's simply about recognizing the different needs, locating them when they arrive, keeping them registered, and making sure the right organizations are there to support them.
As both an advocate and a storyteller, how do you find a balance between spreading awareness on the challenges people with disabilities and conflict zones face without stigmatizing them in the process?
I mean, obviously, you know, with my own personal experience of living with disability myself, I've always just wanted to set an example of what you can achieve in life. And I'm really lucky. You know, I travel the world, I do the work that I love. I'm a chef as well. You know, I work full time. And I meet people that really are no different to me. There was a guy in Cambodia I met a few years ago called Han. And Han had been injured as a child soldier fighting for the Khmer Rouge. He'd lost both of his legs like me, same age as me. And when I went to visit him at his house, he showed me beside where he lived with his sister, who was also kind of struggling to feed her family. And by the side of her house was 3 dog baskets. He pointed at the biggest one. He said, "That's where I sleep." And I remember thinking, you know, Han was no different to me, as resilient, as strong, as determined to get his life back, as positive, as funny as I am. But the only difference was the opportunity to have support he needed to rebuild his life. He lives like a dog. I live a full life. So when it comes to telling people stories, I find the humor, the resilience. I like to share meals with people, document the everyday life. But I see everybody I document as myself. And for me, I try and represent people in the same way I want to be represented. And I don't see their weaknesses. I don't see their disability. I see the society and the situation that's put them in that position. So that's where my anger is. In terms of the storytelling, I just tell them as they are.
There's been a spike in casualties from landmines and explosive ordnance around the world in recent years, particularly in Ukraine and Myanmar, and a huge portion of the victims are children. I'm wondering if you can speak to the scale of the problem, how specifically you're working to address it, and whether you think the international community is doing enough to address it.
I mean, one of the first stories I ever did 25 years ago was in Angola, documenting the impact of landmines that had been left there. And I remember being shocked about these silent killers in communities, you know, often designed to be in places where the community goes, like water collection points and roadways. And for a while, it seemed like the tide was turning, and you know, there was a big push against them. Unfortunately, you know, ever since probably I saw a huge increase in Mosul in 2017, with ISIS started producing them. Now with the war in Ukraine, you know, landmines have made a big return. A lot of nations are looking about rebuilding their stockpiles. So we have a new battle to fight with that. I think what's really important to remember or think about is maybe we can't stop the production. Maybe we can't stop the use. But we can work harder on the clearance. I was in Bakhmut in Ukraine a couple of years ago doing the fighting for there, and I took a break and ended up in Verdun in France, the scene of some of the heaviest fighting in World War I. And it really struck me when I was there, a farmer was killed from a munition left over from World War I. There's an area known as the Zone Rouge, which is the size of Paris and still uninhabitable because of UXO left from World War I. And it made me think, having just come from Ukraine, that the legacy we leave, not just in Ukraine, in Palestine, in Yemen, in so many other countries, is that there is a child not yet born that will die from one of these wars because of the munitions left. Is that the legacy that we want? Because I say there are people still dying from World War I. Nobody who fought that conflict is alive. And if we don't clear munitions in all these current conflicts, we will leave a legacy, which means children not yet born will die from these wars.
You're obviously dealing with very heavy issues in your work, and it must be incredibly difficult to see people, and especially children, suffer in this manner. I'm wondering, we only have a few moments left here. I'm wondering how you maintain a sense of optimism while you're doing this work, while you're seeing these horrific things firsthand all the time.
I mean, it's hard. I find my balance in cooking and food. I have a rule that I won't photograph anyone if I haven't eaten with them first. I would say food is the antithesis of war. War is hatred and destruction, and food is bringing people together and love. And it's in those shared meals with the people who are living on the front lines, who are living in the conflict zones, in the urban settings of war, where I hear laughter, where I share stories. And actually, it's them that give me hope. Because I do believe in humanity. Despite everything I've seen in 25 years, despite my own experiences, I'm a complete optimist and believe in people. And so actually, as strange as it may sound, it is those moments, those quiet moments over a shared meal near a front line where you can maybe even still hear the rumble of gunfire in the distance. That's where I find humanity at its most pure, find love, and that's the strength that keeps me going to tell these stories.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I think I can speak for everyone here when I say we really appreciate you sharing your stories.